Us via the World Wide Web on the Parliament's website www.ttparliament.org and on our YouTube channel ParlView. We are just a few moments away from the start of today's sitting of the Senate. On the agenda, there are some 5 questions for oral answer, and debate is expected to continue on the Strategic Services Agency Amendment Bill. This will be the 3rd day of debate for this piece of legislation, which was passed in the House. We take you over to the chamber.
The Honourable, the President.
We welcome you to the 18th sitting of the House in the first session of the 11th Parliament that takes place on Tuesday, May 10th, 2016.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator Daniel Duque and David Small, who are both out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from His Excellency, the President Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, SCORTT. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. By His Excellency Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTT, SC, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. To Rohan Sinanan. Whereas Senator Daniel Duque is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Rohan Sinanan, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 10th of May 2016 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Duque, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 6th day of May 2016. To Mr. Justin John Kerr. Whereas Senator David Small is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Justin John Kerr, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 10th of May 2016 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator David Small. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 10th day of May 2016. Honorable senators are required to take the oath, so please stand.
I, Rohan Senanan, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by the Bhagavad Gita that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibility to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Justin John Kerr, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, urgent questions, questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, today the government will be answering questions 36, questions 43, questions 44, and question 52, and we kindly ask for the deferral of question 47 for 2 weeks.
Question 47 is therefore deferred for 2 weeks. Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 36 to the Minister of Finance.
Madam President, I put to answer this question on behalf of the Minister of Finance as Leader of Government Business in the Senate. The government is currently in the process of reviewing the pros and cons of the proposed extension of coverage to self-employed persons under the National Insurance System. It is important to note that this review has become necessary in light of new information on costs arising from the most recent actuarial review of the National Insurance System. The 9th actuarial review indicated that the inherent cost of the proposed measures may be significantly more than originally anticipated. In response to Section B, the review of the feasibility of the proposal is expected to take 6 to 9 months, at which time a decision will be taken as to the way forward with respect to this matter.
Senator Mark.
Question number 43 to the Prime Minister.
I answer this question not as the acting Prime Minister, but as leader of government business in the Senate. The Cabinet-appointed Committee for Restoration is chaired by the Prime Minister and provides oversight for construction projects pertaining to the restoration and renovation of historical buildings, particularly those around the Queen's Park Savannah, including the President's House. The restorative work to be done on the Red House would include the inputs of the Joint Select Committee of Parliament. At this point in time, consideration is also being given to re-establish the Joint Select Committee of Parliament to monitor the progress of the works associated with the restoration.
Senator Mark.
Is the Honourable Minister aware that the Prime Minister is on record as saying that a Joint Select Committee will be established to deal with parliamentary accommodation? And if you are so aware, could you tell us when that Joint Select Committee on Parliamentary Accommodation will be established?
I can't give the specific time, but I can almost say without fear of contradiction it will be very shortly.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 44 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Madam President, I answer this question in my capacity as the Acting Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. The Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited has advised that on the morning of Tuesday, 11th of February 2016, an oil spill was reported east of riser platform number 1 in the Soldado main field, Point Fortin. The company further advised that approximately 27 barrels of oil was recorded spilled due to a leak on a 12-inch trunk line between riser platform 1 and riser platform 5. The spill was approximately 6 miles long with intermittent streaks half mile in width. The leak on the 12-inch trunk line was subsequently isolated and repaired. Cleanup and containment efforts were completed in approximately 2.5 days and normal operations resumed. Shoreline surveys were conducted on beaches between Point Coco and Columbus Bay during the cleanup exercise. I am pleased to report that no shoreline and nearshore ecosystem were impacted as a result of this incident.
Madam President, could the Honourable Leader of the House indicate when did the oil spill occur of that particular coast that you mentioned? And did I hear you say that it was on the 25th of February, the 11th of February? Could you share with the Honourable Senator as to when the oil spill actually occurred?
Well, my information is that the leak was developed on the 11th of February, so the oil spill is simultaneous with the detection of the leak. Because if it's a leaking pipeline, it just takes hours for the spill to build.
Madam President, could the Honourable Leader of the House indicate when did Petrotrin issue a public statement informing the national community of this particular oil spill? Was it on the same day or was it a couple of days later?
I'm not seized of that specific information, but I can provide it subsequent.
Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 52 to the Prime Minister.
I rise to answer this question on behalf of the Honourable Prime Minister and Acting Prime Minister as well. The matter of the bank transaction has been investigated and resolved. There is no intention of or need for an inquiry on the part of the government.
President, may I ask the Honorable Attorney General, who conducted this inquiry into this matter, and why is the government not intent on pursuing a proper inquiry into this transaction?
Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President. As the Honorable Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate would know, a public statement to this effect was in fact carried, and the Honorable Prime Minister and the Office of the Attorney General investigated this matter, a full description of which was provided to the public in an open address to the media, at which questions were taken and answered. There has been, since that date, no inquiry on behalf of anyone in relation to this matter. As a result of the full report that was provided, there has therefore been resolution of the matter.
Madam President, could the Honorable Attorney General indicate whether the First Citizens Bank conducted an inquiry, and whether, for instance, that inquiry cleared the Honorable Minister in question?
Sure. I'm very pleased to again inform, having done so in the public domain already, that not only did First Citizens Bank produce written documentation clearing the Honourable Minister of certain inquiries made on behalf of a newspaper reporter, but so too did Republic Bank also put into writing its position, and that therefore there being independent confirmation from two commercial banks, being the two commercial banks in question, the matter has been resolved.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate are moved by a minister, public business, government business, bills second reading.
Honorable Senators, the debate on the second reading of the following bill, which was in progress when the Senate adjourned on Tuesday, May the 3rd, 2016, will be resumed. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency. The senators who have spoken on this bill are listed as follows. Honorable Faris Alwari, MP, Attorney General, mover of the motion. Senator Wade Mark, Senator Dr. Danishwar Mahabir, Senator W. Michael Coppin, Senator Gerald Ramdeen, Senator H.R. Ian Roach, Senator the Honorable Clarence Rambarat, Senator Khadija Amin, Senator Justin Juncker, Senator Melissa Ramkissoon. Those members who now wish to join the debate may do so at this time. Senator Cummings.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to join in this debate on the Strategic Services Agency Amendment Bill 2016. Let me take this opportunity, Madam President, to welcome the students who are joining us here this evening in the chamber, and to say that a lot has been said in the public domain about the amendments to this bill, and it certainly has drawn a lot of public attention. Unfortunately, a lot of it misinformation. What we are here today to deal with, Madam President, is a bill that is intended to amend the Strategic Services Agencies Act, Chapter 1506, by expanding the functions of the SSA, or the Strategic Services Agency. And let me just put into context what this discussion is really about, because it is clear that the opposition has decided to peddle fear-mongering and to promote this bill in a way that would cause citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to think that we are dealing with a spying bill. What are we dealing with here today? The SSA was established, Madam President, way back in 1995, with responsibility for centralizing information that could assist in the detection and the prevention of the illicit traffic in narcotics. That is what the SSA was set up to do. And the main functions of the agency centered around facilitating as an information center to assist, as I said before, in the detection and the prevention of the illicit traffic in narcotic drugs. And therefore, the bill before us, which we started last week and continue today, is really to expand the remit of the SSA. It's not to deal with spying on anybody. It's not to deal with interception of communication. There's a separate piece of legislation for that, and we will talk about that. But what has been peddled in the public domain is as though the government has come to the House to somehow bring legislation to spy on if you're talking to your grandmother in Toku about the Christmas function last year. That is not what we're about here today. If we have an agency that has been set up to treat with narcotics and information gathering around that, and we have a problem in the country with serious crimes, many other serious crimes, and the state has at its disposal an agency such as the SSA, and the government did not seek to provide to the security agencies the kind of support for other serious crimes that the SSA can provide in relation to narcotics, then we'd be an irresponsible government. By including broader law enforcement coordination and intelligence functions, Madam President, the scope and functions of the SSA will be expanded. In Clause 3, by shifting the focus to include all serious crimes, so that just instead of just narcotics, the following offenses which are listed here will now fall under the remit of the SSA. And I think it is important for me to mention them and list them so that the public listening to this debate could understand exactly what we are about here. And some of the other offenses, as now defined as serious offenses, which will now be captured, would be offenses related to homicide, treason, terrorist acts, terrorist financing, cybercrime, chemical and biological and nuclear weapons, money laundering, weapons of mass destruction, trafficking in children and persons, gangs, illicit trafficking in narcotics, which was there before, corruption, which I think is why the opposition is so uncomfortable, offenses which carry a penalty of not less than 5 years imprisonment, firearms and ammunition, and smuggling. So that the agencies involved in national security, the agencies involved in crime fighting, will now have at its disposal the SSA gathering intelligence to lead them, because other than that is the blind leading the blind. And if we are serious about dealing with crime in Trinidad and Tobago, a responsible government will make sure that the security agencies get the required strategic support that they need. That is what we are about. But some people like theater, and some people like to rile up the population and make everybody scared of their own shadow. People talking to you on the phone, you call a pizza man to order a pizza, and you say, I ain't too sure we can talk on this phone and you're not too safe. Riling up the population. Almost a large percentage of the phone calls you get now. Nothing illegal, people discussing. Is this line good? I could, because they say it to me. Is it safe to talk to you on this phone? I said, yes. Do you want to discuss something illegal? No. But if you want to have a conversation, it's fine to talk. We're not committing crimes here. The criminals are the ones who need to be afraid. That's right. True. And that is what the opposition needs to say to the population. We need to say jointly in a joint voice to the to the criminals in society, you should be afraid of conducting criminal activities on your phone. Not the average law-abiding citizen going about their business. They require us in the parliament to pass legislation that will make sure the police knows if a crime is committed in Toco, Matlot, Manzalin or Tobago, that the police has the support. Whereas the SSA was previously responsible for maintaining a database of manufacturers and suppliers and people who are importing illegal drugs into the country, the database will now be expanded to include all persons involved in criminal activity across the country. There will be nowhere to hide. So that it's the criminals, I expect some criminal association to be marching up and down Port of Spain saying, we don't want this bill. Not the people who were in government just recently and who brought to the parliament the interception of communication bill. What a level of hypocrisy. You're in government, you're in opposition, and it's good. You're in government, and it's good. You get into opposition, and everything the government does, you can't support. Because you all of a sudden love all the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and you want to make sure and secure everybody's interests. Take the mask off. The PNM in opposition behaved responsibly and supported legislation. And I can name a few lots of legislation brought by the UNC with some amendments because they don't always do it right. The bail amendment bill was supported by the PNM government. The anti-gang bill, the anti-terrorism bill, and of course the Interception of Communication Act. That was brought by the UNC government. And today, they come to the parliament and want to give the impression that whilst the government is merely trying to expand the remit of the SSA, that this bill is somehow about interception of communication. And they know better, Madam President. Speaker after speaker from the opposition bench saying to Trinidad and Tobago that they are here to protect the interests of the citizens. Well, if you are here to protect the interests of the citizens, be a responsible opposition and support this bill. Because the country, the citizens have their eyes on you. It is no longer a case when we speak in parliament and one has to wait to read the newspaper or look at the news to get a clip. We are live. And the Channel 11 is one of the most watched stations in the country. Citizens are looking at you to see whether you have matured, to see whether you have grown up. The agency, Madam President, will, as I said, provide invaluable support to law enforcement agencies, providing them with intelligence to assist them in the detection and prosecution of serious crimes. Madam President, it is well known that we have a serious crime problem in this country. And a lot of people like to portray crime as a political problem. Crime is not a political problem. But if you're in government, you have a responsibility to the citizens to make sure that there is a safe place for all of us to live. And that is what the PNM government is all about. To ensure that we do the right thing, even when other people feel that they must go out there and create panic within the population. A serious government will introduce policy and support to our law enforcement agencies to improve their capacity and their operation that could lead towards improved detection and prosecution. That's what we want. This will serve as a deterrent to would-be criminals. It is the would-be criminals, as I said before, who need to fear the security agencies, not the law-abiding citizen. This government, Madam President, is committed to providing our security agencies with the necessary support in intelligence gathering, and that is why we are here to broaden the functions of the SSA by expanding the definition of serious crimes and bringing all of those other serious crimes under the remit of the SSA. Madam President, it would be in our best interest, in Trinidad and Tobago's best interest, if, when it comes to matters as important as this, that we put aside partisan interests and think about Trinidad and Tobago, where all of us must live and live in peace. But somehow, and I've mentioned it here before, when in opposition, the UNC sees itself as in the real terms of the word opposition, which is that we must oppose, 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 without carefully considering the implications of opposing good legislation. Madam President, unfortunately for the criminals in our society, this government is not going to sit idly by. This government is not going to sit idly by while criminals run loose in this country. National security is now driven by intelligence gathering and by giving strategic support to our arms of the security services. We have to ask ourselves, what are our friends in the opposition really so concerned about? What could have happened between 2010 and 2015 that could have some people so disturbed that they wish certain things to remain secret? Because, Madam President, is a well-known saying, who don't have cocoa in the sun need not fear the rain.
Madam President, Madam President, is 46.6 apply here?
Cocoa?
I'm asking.
Cocoa in the sun?
What are you trying to say?
Senator Amin. Continue, Senator Cummings.
Thank you, Madam President. Only the criminal minds need to fear this legislation, Madam President. Only the criminal minds need to fear being probed by the authorities. Those who do the crime must pay the time. A lot was said about privacy, as there was an attempt in this debate to shift the focus of the very simple piece of legislation before us from what its intent is to cause persons to think, as I mentioned earlier, that somehow their personal information, their emails, their phone calls, the 1.3 million citizens that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, the impression was given that should we pass this piece of legislation, that from tomorrow morning, the 1.3 million citizens that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, all of a sudden, like Kazam, your emails and your phone calls will somehow be monitored by the SSA, and that is not the case. That is not what is before us. Even in the Interception of Communication Act, there is strict procedure as to how communication can be intercepted. It is spelled out here. It is not that anybody can wake up any morning. That is, it is an offense actually in the Act. It is an offense. And there are 3 authorities that can authorize the interception of communication: the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of the Defense Force, and the Director of the SSA. And even so, there is a procedure to follow. So this fear that people are trying to put out there in the public domain, it is just misplaced and intended to stir up the population and cause people to become fearful, so that you drop your cell phone, you stop using your phone, and you probably go back to pen and letters. Before we had emails. A lot of fear being put out there in the public domain. There's a critical role, Madam President, for the security services to play in any democracy. And we have laws in this country. And the PNM is a law-abiding government. In so doing, we'll preserve the rule of law. And we will make sure that the protective services have the eyes and the ears that they need to fight against all serious crimes. You know, Madam President, somebody mentioned to me before this debate here today, the amount of things that the last government would have allowed to happen under their very nose is possibly the reason why they are so scared to have all serious crimes captured in this piece of legislation. And you hear stories, Madam President. You hear stories of former government officials buying mansions. The Tobago plantation, I hear there's a Villa 111 that somebody needs to check out and see who owns it. Somebody probably needs to check that out. Maybe that's the reason why. Because somebody does not want who the beneficial owner of Villa 111 in the Tobago plantations to be known to the public. We'll check that out. We'll check that out. The public needs to know what happened in this country for the last 5 years. But as I listened to the debate last week, I wondered whether we were debating the original bill of 2005, or whether we were debating the amendments before us of 1995. And let us just look, therefore, at what is said in the notes that attend to the bill as to the purpose of this bill, so we can put this discussion to some context. Clause 1 contains the title of the Act. Clause 2 provides for the coming into force of the Act and the date of proclamation, etc. Clause 3 will amend Section 2 of the Act to delete the definition of drug trafficking and to provide the definition for serious crimes. Clause 4 seeks to amend Section 6(1) and 2 of the Act to expand the functions of the SSA. And Clause 5 seeks to amend Section 9 of the Act to provide the funds and resources for the SSA. And that is what the bill is about. Not all the drama, not all the theater. Somebody said this debate should have lasted 1 hour. But we have to respond to what is said by the opposition to ensure that the public knows. And the public also know that the UNC will not want to support legislation like this. But sometimes you must surprise the public. Sometimes you must surprise the public and act responsibly. Surprise the public. Madam President, I know that my friend, would not like a lot of things. A lot of things can be said here today. A lot of things. Somebody told me earlier on today that some information coming out of the Panama situation might be causing some people some sleepless nights. And I understand today that an attorney who worked for the CDA was named as an intermediary in one of the latest Panama Papers leaks. We need to probably check that out, Madam President. Lots of things that they would like to keep secret. We have a real problem with criminal conduct. Everybody knows that. Trinidad and Tobago knows that. And we have heard the Attorney General spoke of the amount of cell phone calls that were jammed out of the prisons. We have heard of criminals from behind bars calling shot, as they say, on citizens outside, innocent citizens. We have heard this, we read in the newspapers. And therefore the government has a responsibility to ensure that the law-abiding citizens of this country are not terrorized by the criminal elements. And I've been trying to wrap my head around some of the discussion following this debate. And, Madam President, it will be useful, possibly, for us to come back to what the bill really is about. As long as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago is law-abiding, as the great majority of our law-abiding citizens are, they need not fear anything from the security services of this country. And so I want to restate, Madam President, that this bill before us, for the purposes of the record, is not a spying bill. It is not an interception of communication bill. We already have an act to deal with that. It will not, Madam President, give an open window to permit any agency to spy on innocent citizens in our population. The opposition is engaged in fear-mongering to whip up support for their dying organization. Riding on this wave, because clearly they know that people will be concerned if they feel that their privacy is going to be invaded. So taking that window, they put a bomb in that window and exploded it to cause citizens to feel afraid. This is not what this legislation is about. And so it is our responsibility to expose the hypocrisy of the opposition. This bill does not give the SSA power to intercept communication. The bill will empower the SSA to coordinate and gather intelligence from all intelligence gathering agencies of the state. All intelligence, Madam President, relating to serious crimes as opposed to just narcotics-related offenses. The law as it is now allows for the interception of communication And this is spelled out in the Interception of Communications Act, Chapter 1508. And this, Madam President, is done in specific circumstances. So that in wrapping up, Madam President, there are certain things that we need to make clear in terms of the bill before us. Let us stick to the bill.
That's right.
We are not debating the Interception of Communications Act. We are debating the SSA amendment. And that is what the population must be told. So I call upon all members present here today to join with the government as we organize to support the security services in a meaningful way to provide the kind of strategic support that they would require in this ongoing fight against the criminals who feel that they have an upper hand in this country. I thank you very much, Madam.
Before I call on the next speaker, may I join in welcoming the students of the Sawo North Secondary School who are in our chamber today. May I ask who is going to speak next? Because if someone is not, we will call on the Attorney General to wrap up. Who is to speak next?
Okay. May I, Madam President?
Yes, Senator Mabia, briefly.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President. I was under the impression that there will be a speaker from the opposition, but in any event, Madam President, two speakers from the independent bench are ready to speak at this time if the opposition is fielding no one.
All right. May I? When the time comes for speaking, people are free to just gauge my attention and I will call on the speaker. So may I just ask who is the next speaker?
Senator Shrikissoon.
Senator Shrikissoon.
Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to contribute to this very interesting debate at this very interesting time. And over the last week, a lot has happened. And as Senator Roach pointed out last week during his presentation, he did indicate that some documents were given to the independent bench with respect coming from the office of the leader of the opposition, prepared briefs as to their position on the SSA Act. And so too, even over the weekend, we've had correspondence coming out of the government and out of the Office of the Attorney General inviting us to a meeting, which we saw in the media. And I just want to say at this point in time that as an independent senator, I appreciate any opportunity to provide all relevant information as it pertains to the advancement of Trinidad and Tobago. However, I would have preferred, as in the case of the opposition, that the information being presented before the commencement of the debate would have been the same with respect to the invitation extended by the Honourable Attorney General. So I know, and I'm assuming here, that there is no real ill intent, but the Office of the Attorney General, through you, Madam President, used the opportunity to try to get all information relevant out. But I'm just thinking that in the spirit of the debate, and that the debate had commenced, that it would not have been in the best interest to serve that invitation at this time. So through you, Madam President, Honourable Attorney General, I thank you for the invitation, but I really think that it was untimely. It is no doubt, as Senator Cummings was saying earlier, that Trinidad and Tobago has an issue of crime and criminality which has been plaguing our country for many years. And understanding that this bill being brought before us here today provides an element of intent to reduce the level of crime and criminality in this country, I would like to say at this point in time, given the intent of the legislation, I would say that the Honorable Government, the Honorable Attorney General and his government needs to be commended for at least taking a step towards reducing the level of crime in our country or addressing it. As a citizen of this country, I have been a victim of crime in many different ways. As a schoolboy going to school and traversing the southern city, I have been mugged several times. As a business owner, my parents have been mugged and robbed several times. As an employer now and in one of the family businesses, I have been robbed at gunpoint. As a family business again, we have been victims of kidnapping. So if it is anyone that knows how it feels to be violated in any way, it is this senator and my family, and I'm sure that my sentiments would be echoed throughout many members of this honorable House and the wider public. We are victims of crime, and it is the responsibility of the government to provide some element of security for the citizenry. And if this bill is meant to provide some element of security or increased security, increased detection, then my intention is to clearly give some support to the bill, because the bill is meant to provide an increased level of security to our citizens. And what we've been seeing here over the past years is that an increase and a runaway level of crime, and we're seeing increased expenditure on national security. We're seeing manifestos carefully crafted to highlight the urgency with which national security is going to be addressed. And yet still, as citizens, we still remain victims, and we still remain susceptible. And just as a point of the bill with respect to serious crimes, robberies in Trinidad and Tobago have been on the rise, and it accounts for probably about 50% of the crime in Trinidad and Tobago, with a detection rate of probably 12 or 15%. And serious crimes and robberies in this case is not being addressed by the legislation, probably for due cause or because of the law or because of the penalties associated with it. And I'm okay with that, but it also needs to be addressed. Robberies need to be addressed, because the definition of serious crime does not allow for robberies or break-ins to be included in it. So I really wish to commend the Honorable Attorney General for bringing this legislation, and it really tells me that at least the government is considering crime and criminality in our country and bringing legislation as a priority for the security of our citizenry. Further, the Honorable Attorney General, in his presentation, highlighted the fact that the information or the strategic intelligence that has been collected is being used or stored in silos. And what I'm interpreting that to mean is that agencies were hoarding the information and there was a lack of sharing. And therefore, this legislation also allows for the information to be shared across agencies. So again, I would like to give kudos to the government for at least trying to integrate the information. And with this information, the goal is clearly towards empowering detection and crime prevention. So again, the bill has a lot of positives attached to it, because if it is that it could improve detection and empower detection or improve detection as well as prevention, then clearly the bill again has a great element of positivity in it. And finally, it allows the new act, under this act, it is saying that the SSA now has the remit or the capability to share information across global agencies. And Trinidad and Tobago is clearly not insulated from terrorist and global criminal activity. So it is again a positive as it seeks to deal with the global issue of crime and terrorist activity. So the bill in itself, the intent of the bill, clearly has some positives attached to it. So we can see the intent of the bill. However, when I carefully go through the bill, I've recognized as a citizen, and I'm speaking about now, that this bill has some areas of concern that I would like addressed. And I want to reiterate the points shared by Senator Mahabe, my colleague, and Senator Shrikissoon, that in the that with respect to the performance of the SSA, and while they've cited different areas, different situations with respect to the functioning of the SSA, I would like specifically to go back to the drug bust of 2005 at Monas Island. And what happened at that case is 6 were found guilty, but when you read the judgment delivered by Justice Alice Suhon in that particular case, she was saying that, and I quote, Justice Alice Suhon yesterday questioned why the main house at Passy Bay, Monas Island, was not searched. So here we have an intelligence agency moving in, or with the responsibility for drug trafficking, capturing performing and obtaining a seizure at a cabin house at an adjoining house. This agency is meant for strategic intelligence, but the main house was not searched. Intelligence. As Senator Cummings was saying, this is about the functions of the SSA. And here it is, we have a judge saying, but listen, your basic form or your area of evidence to be gathered, you're not going there. And she further says she was puzzled as to why the owners of the house, co-owned by Hugh Patrick, Grace Rosemary Fitzwilliams, and Helen Forbes, never appeared to be interviewed. So how can an SSA, and the term S is strategic, for in terms of drug intervention and narcotics, with basic information before it, not exercising its primary function? And therefore, in this case, as Senator Mahabe pointed out and Senator Shrikissoon pointed out, if the SSA is incapable of providing... Sure.
Thank you, Honourable Senator, for giving way. May I just assist you only point out that the SSA has no operational function and never did. It is only under our laws that the police can obtain warrants, do searches, and conduct interviews and conduct raids. So to suggest that the SSA's efficacy is to be gauged by the police action is to compare apples and oranges. Most respectfully.
Thank you, Honorable Attorney General. But the issue here is intelligence. Intelligence. Not the functioning of the police service. Where was the intelligence? And if it is that this agency is meant to collect intelligence, then what is the finding of the intelligence? Yes. And did the findings of the intelligence inform the services that you now like to be integrated or to work with similar information? Why not? And here lies a tremendous issue. So, thank you, Senator. Silos. So that is the situation with respect to the performance of the SSA. Why is the intelligence not coming forward? And if I'm to reflect on the Honorable Attorney General's contribution in the other place, he said that this legislation was meant to expose the big fish. In Trinidad and Tobago, of the 3 drug busts that my 2 colleagues and myself have spoken of, totals roughly $2 billion. $2 billion. If you ask the Minister of Finance, what is $2 billion? He's going to say to you, 25% of the overdraft at Central Bank. That's the value. And yet still, at this point in time, although there were convictions, there is no owner. And this is the function of the SSA, to provide intelligence.
Police don't accept it.
So the function of the SSA is to provide intelligence and share it. So we can't operate in silos, as Goodly Minister is saying. There needs to be some element of sharing. But where is it coming from? So now that we've examined the performance of the SSA, I now wish to look at this act specifically, the SSA, in alignment with the information and the act suggested by Senator Cummings, which is the Interception of Communications Act. And so, according to Senator Cummings, he said that an authorized agent, according to the Interception of Communication Act, is one of three: the Chief of Defense, the Police Commissioner, and the Director of the SSA. And therefore, the SSA and the Interception of Communication Act does not allow operationalization of the law, it just is the law. And so an agency or person has to implement the law, and hence we have one area, one agent, or one agency being the SSA. Now, as I said before, there are three authorized agents that can intercept communication. And so we have a situation here today where you have the SSA director, the police commissioner, and the chief of defense having the authority to intercept. But with the expanded function of the SSA and the expanded definition of serious crimes, I am seeing that there's a clear overlapping of responsibility between the police service and the SSA in terms of gathering intelligence. And why am I saying this? Because the police commissioner or the police service has the authority, or in their capacity can actually function and investigate and seek to acquire information with respect to serious crimes. And now the police commissioner, according to the Interception of Communication Act, is an authorized agent to intercept. And now we're seeing the same function under the SSA to intercept for the same crimes. So I'm seeing here an element of duplication, and if I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected. But I'm seeing an element of duplication here between the role and function of the police commissioner and his service as compared to the SSA. And we are saying that we no longer want to operate in silos, but we want to have information shared. But inefficiency is still being duplicated when both functions are being given the same privileges, and both heads, the police commissioner and the SSA director, has the same authority and power to intercept according to the Act. So then the question is, why are we giving two individuals or two agencies the power to investigate or the power to intercept, and the functions are overlapping? I have some concern with that. The next area that I have a little bit of concern about is the privacy of information with respect to the information collected. According to the Interception of Communications Act 1508, subsection 2, this act shall have effect even though inconsistent with sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution, which tells me that, hey, there is some element of privacy here, but it is somewhat relaxed in the context of national security. Interception of Communications Act. And I'm, sorry? And property. Right. And property. So I'm understanding that the Act, although it recognized that it was being somewhat close to probably infringing on the rights, gave an element of first disclosure, and then saying, okay, by the internal controls later on, we will still seek to secure or to keep the information confidential in whatever way we can, according to the Act. So important was this privacy to be guarded. Section 8 of the same Interception of Communication Act says, subject to this section, an authorized officer may apply ex parte to a judge for a warrant authorizing the named person in a warrant to A, intercept, and B, disclose. So this act is saying through a warrant, the authorized officers can, 1, intercept, and B, disclose. And I'm good with that, through a warrant. But when we come to the SSA Act now, we're seeing under the functions of the agency through number 6, according to the Act, 6E and F, it says the SSA has the power to disseminate information and intelligence to the appropriate services. And point F, provide intelligence and analytical support for the appropriate operational and intelligence arms of appropriate services. So the agency has the power to disseminate this confidential information to the relevant services. And the key word here is services. And if we choose to define what services is according to the parent legislation, services means the Ministry of National Security, Customs and Excise, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, and any other ministry or department so declared by order of the minister. So here we're seeing, under the Interception of Communications Act, the guard for privacy and the requirement of a warrant to A, intercept and B, disseminate, whereas the SSA Act is saying as a function of the SSA, we can now disseminate to a person, agency, department or ministry as so declared by the minister, which is defined as services in the SSE Act. And I'm particularly concerned as to why it is the Interception of Communications Act would require a warrant for an authorized agent to disseminate, while the SSA Act allows the agency the freedom at will to disseminate by order of the minister. How can the SSA director, under the Interception of Communication Act, operate in one way, and under the SSA Act has the freedom to do otherwise? How can then it tells me that the SSA director has the choice as to whether or not he chooses to guard the privacy of the information collected through obtaining a warrant or go through the minister and share the information? And that is very critical in my mind. And if nothing else is remembered here today, I am concerned about the freedom of the SSA director through the permission of the minister to willingly dispense of information as the minister sees fit, when this treatment of information, according to the Interception of Communications Act, is not permissible. Very, 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 very much concerned about that. And therefore, I'm asking at this point in time that this be somewhat considered. Now, according to the Section 8 of the SSA, it also guards the information through the secrecy or an oath of secrecy by the employees or agents of the SSA. Such is the confidentiality of the information. But when the information hits the SSA and the SSA chooses to dispense to third parties, there is no obligation by the third parties to treat the information confidentially. So the oath of office at this point in time, according to the Act here, is saying that there's an oath of secrecy for the agents, but as the minister or the agency dispenses with it, I am not sure, and I'm not seeing where privacy of information is still guarded as it hits the public domain, third parties. And so if a person now becomes aware that there's information about them, I am sure that they will not be able to access this information, because more than likely the Freedom of Information Act would guard the information as that of national security. So the treatment of information, the subject cannot access the information, but third parties have access to the same information that the minister can so direct. Where is the equity and fairness in the treatment of the information? I'm very much concerned with respect to that. Now, we have another situation here with respect to executive power and centralized power. The SSA director, the police commissioner, has a particular order to follow, to intercept, a particular order to follow, to disseminate. But the SSA director here somewhat has some element of intervention or some element of control or influence by that of the minister. If we compare the police commissioner and we compare the SSA director, the police commissioner, if he acts outside of his bound, is liable and can be disciplined by the police commission. If according to the Act, it says, if I could find it quickly, that the police commission actually appoints the police commissioner, and the police commission has the authority to discipline a police commissioner if he acts outside of his remit. But here the SSA, who has the same privilege of the director of the SSA has the same privilege to access this information, if he chooses not to act with it in accordance with law, then who is he accountable to? And he is accountable to the minister. And it is saying in the legislation, the SSA legislation, that the functions of the SSA director is to advise the minister. And further in the SSA legislation, it says the minister has the authority to direct the actions of the director. So we're seeing here collaborative leadership, where SSA director advises the minister, and the minister still has the freedom to act and instruct the director. The last time we saw such a relationship, when the minister advocated a particular position and the director or the head of that institution did not really comply, what happened? Ministry of Finance. Present issue before this country, where the minister gave a directive, the person in charge was really not too happy with it, and it ended up in a fiasco. I am still saying here in my budget presentation of 2015-2016, one of the pitfalls of this country is institutions. Institutions. And if we have the power to intervene and implement and do what we please with executive authority, our institutions would never be credible. And here it is in the same institution, the SSA, we're seeing direct influence from the minister. Why? And so with that direct influence into the SSA no longer has to act independently in the interest of the public, because he's carrying out the will of the minister. But this agency that is responsible for private information cannot be given the sole and the executive power to do as it pleases from the agents that govern it, which is the government. They just can't do that. People are involved. Where is the independence and where is the protection? So let's follow the chain of command. The minister gives the SSA director an instruction, and the SSA director intercepts communication and dispenses freely with it. How is the citizenry going to respond to that? Whereas if it was gathered under the police commissioner, under the Interception of Communications Act, the treatment would be different. We can't do that. And so I am saying that there are very serious concerns. Duplication of responsibility. There's a situation where the information collected can be treated differently, the same information under two separate acts, which governs the same person in terms of a director. It can't be. It can't be. And the last point I want to raise before I conclude, Madam President, is that the Honorable Attorney General cited the balance to executive power is through the Office of the Auditor General. And that's how we're going to balance it. In my understanding and my interpretation of the role and function of the Auditor General, it says that the Auditor General is required by law to examine and report annually to Parliament on the accounts of ministries, departments, regional health authorities, and so on. The portfolio includes accounts of projects, all pensions and gratuities, and the grant of credit on the exchequer account. Financial oversight can never be used as or substituted for internal controls as it pertains to the execution of executive power. It could never be used. And if we are to follow any element of the financial crises of 2001, 2002, 2003, where the largest corporations in the world suffered from accounting scandals, Enron and Xerox to name a few, through which combined codes of corporate governance have been issued to deal with internal controls, that is not present in this legislation. It is not. The functioning as an auditor for financial accounts cannot be substituted as an internal control mechanism for the way in which executive power is wielded or yielded and centered and used in this country. It cannot be. So if we are recognizing that there must be a balance of power and the Office of the Auditor General does not have the capacity to govern on internal controls, then fix it now. Fix it. Because you're using the Office of the Attorney General, of the Auditor General, sorry, to execute and to say that this is the check and balance on executive power, when clearly they don't. And if I am to say, I recall a newspaper article only last week where the Auditor General said that there was mass wastage of public funds when it comes to the rental of properties. Only last week, over the period, I think 2010 to 2013. We are in 2016. So even the findings of the Auditor General, although may be true or can be true or is true, we can't correct it. But we have a situation where the SSA director has the executive power or has the authority through its minister to collect and disseminate information as the Act says. Why? And so I am saying that possibility of executive power, minister, SSA director, to collect, intercept, whatever the relationship with, really boils down to an element of trust. Can the public trust this arrangement? Can the public trust this arrangement that has existed so many years in so many different forms and so many different situations and ministries? And I want to just recall a few. Former Speaker of the House under house arrest. Former CJ charged, case crumbles within 1 week. Point 14 Highway through Senator Khan and his information that the inappropriate or ill quality work cannot really be addressed because of Addendum 2, executive power signing off on it. The financial dashboard of our country. Nobody ever told this country that the overdraft was so high, but they had the executive power to do it. Live sport. Nobody knows about it, but they had the executive power to do it. David West and the chairmanship of the Police Service Commission. Scandal. Mass resignation. Even probably new government. Executive power wielded and yielded. So, can executive power really work in a situation where you're asking us to trust this arrangement? And the answer is clearly no. Because past performance, if it is an indication of what is to come, clearly says that it didn't work in the past. There are no internal controls, no amendments to ensure that the desired result of the future is what we're looking for. And if I am just to use an analogy of the ISO certification, not too sure how far it is. When a product is ISO certified, it is saying that the product is of a certain quality. But it is not the product that is certificated. It is the process that is certificated, which says that if the process is of a certain standard, it guarantees that the outcome is clearly what we want it to be. And in this case, if the process is flawed, the end result could never be what we're looking for. Madam President, I thank you.
Mr. Richards.
Madam President, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this fervent debate. I'm looking on in the last week or so, and I think that this debate and the engagement of the national community shows that democracy is alive in Trinidad and Tobago, and I think that is commendable. I also want to commend the Attorney General and by extension the government for putting their money where their mouth is and showing that crime and crime fighting is a priority for this government, because It is one of the two major challenges facing this country. And interestingly enough, in the last week since the amendments to the bill were piloted last week, the fact that, you know, the independents have become a point of focus, and whether or not government should be lobbying through invitations to meeting and or the opposition through sending information to the independents and others, to me, are already non-questions, because when you think about it, all information that can be gleaned in the interest of making a decision in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago should be welcomed. Yeah. You know, the timeliness of the meeting is of question, but I think the indication or the intention is one that should be commended. I also want to focus in my presentation on, in a different sort of way, because fortunately, I guess, I can be judicious in the use of time, because so much has been said and disseminated from several members, both on the government bench, the opposition, and from the independent benches, that there's no need to repeat a lot of what has been said. But I want to take a different kind of approach in terms of trying to present an holistic approach to crime fighting, and juxtaposing the amendments to the bill with what I think, where I think a lot of focus needs to be placed, and that is failing institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. That is at the heart of whether or not amendments to bills and laws can succeed in their intention. I think anyone who has the interest of Trinidad and Tobago at heart can agree that the intention of the amendments are noteworthy and commendable, and must be commended. We may have differences of opinion as to aspects of the bill, aspects of the amendments, and that, I think, can be distilled and discussed in a sober manner, which has for the most part been happening in this honorable house and in the other place. My contribution will focus on balancing those two in terms of us taking a hard look at fixing, remedying those institutions without which no amendments or no new laws can succeed in this country. And that has been our biggest challenge in Trinidad and Tobago. We have what I can describe as an almost stagnant or failing education system. We have question marks over the Integrity Commission. We have concerns over the Teaching Service Commission, the Police Complaints Authority, and several of the institutions that have been designed and instituted to facilitate fighting crime and bettering Trinidad and Tobago. And we complain year after year, the judiciary, remand yard, the backlog of cases every year. Are we going to sit and look at the opening of the law term next year and listen to the Honorable Chief Justice complain about the same issues that he complained about last year without any forward motion at all in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Well, I hope not. I want to start by voicing my concerns. And you know, laws are made, according to Senator Mahabir, for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, for their protection and for the furtherance of their interests. And no matter who sits in the government benches, now or in the future, these laws will apply to those persons. So the laws must look forward. And the laws must protect the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, not now, but for 5 years down the road, or 10 years down the road. And I want to cite several points in our history where what I would call the possibly dangerous intersect between the executive and law enforcement have caused us to raise our eyebrows. And I know it has been a beaten and flogged example, but I think it's important to continuously remind the population about these cases. The first I want to cite, and I know Senator Rambarath spoke about it, is yes, the Reshmi Ramnaran case. Because it has to be reiterated because of the danger it posed to democracy and to the institutions. Because I am yet to be convinced that someone with that abject lack of qualifications and experience could simply fall into a position like that. With the critical nature of the position. And if it is the executive did not know about it, that is also an abdication of responsibility and duty. And that is of concern in terms of the possible dangerous intersect between the executive and law enforcement and the criminal justice system. We also have situations that we can cite, including, as highlighted in the Barbados Free Press, 11 February 2012, police storm officers' journalist's home. 9 police officers raided the Newsday offices and journalist Andrew Bago's home on Wednesday, seizing at least 4 computers, 2 mobile phones, and several external storage drives. Police say they're looking for evidence of Bago's sources for his December 20th, 2011 story about a row between the Integrity Commissioner Ken Gordon and Deputy Chairman Dalit Gafoor. Also, Matt slams spying on journalists, where in 2005, concerns about how names of journalists, I do believe the Honorable Chief Justice, comedians, several persons in society, including myself and all the other colleagues in the media, ended up on this list of persons whose communications were being held under surveillance. 2010, sorry. There was also one in 2005, I believe. We also have, most recently, the nebulous nature of the new flying squad, denied by then Minister of National Security, Jack Warner, and information coming from, I do believe, the former Inspector Gordner. We have, if we are old enough to remember, the old flying squad under Randolph Burrows, and suggestions that Mr. Burrows, then Commissioner Burrows, only took instructions from the then Prime Minister Dr. Eric Williams, and concerns about that sort of intersect and the dangers that it poses. So I think history is replete in this country with a long list of concerns about that type of arrangement. And I say that to elucidate the point that has been made several times about the mechanism for appointment of the director of the SSA, which I think, while the Honorable Attorney General has done a great job in elucidating the government side, there have been several valid concerns voiced by not only the opposition, but members of the independent benches and members of the general public about that mechanism for appointment and the lack of checks and balances that can occur. Senator Shrikissoon also went into quite a bit of his concerns, which really bring the point home. And I think if we are to move forward in terms of making these amendments palatable, they need to be seriously considered. Alongside those issues, to me, if we are to really use the amendments to this bill, if these amendments are passed and it becomes law, we really need to take a hard, cold look at the possibilities that exist if these amendments become law. Commending the Attorney General once again, because it is the first time in my memory in Trinidad and Tobago that I have had the disaggregation of the numbers of the money spent. He was discussing the issue of prison reform recently at a forum with Inspector of Prisons Daniel Khan during a public consultation at City Hall in Port of Spain. And it had been revealed that over $10 billion has been spent in the last year. And I think that sort of information being divulged is commendable, because it resonated with me that $10 billion, according to the AG, it costs an average of $20,000 to house an inmate per month. Let's presume, and also the $50 million a month to maintain 2,235 remand prisoners in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's presume for a minute that the amendments are passed and these amendments become law. We already have 2,235 remand prisoners in Trinidad and Tobago. Some awaiting trial, I understand, for over 10 years. Let's just say, under the new, the extended remit, including homicide, treason, terrorist acts, terrorist financing, cybercrime, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons, money laundering, weapons of mass destruction, trafficking in children and persons, gangs, which I'll come back to later, because I have such sour memories of the state of emergency and what that did to parts of our population. Illicit trafficking in narcotics, drugs, psychotropic substances, and precursor chemicals, corruption, offenses which carry a penalty of not less than 5 years imprisonment, firearms, ammunition, and smuggling. That the law is moderately successful and provides intelligence that identifies, detains, and arrests 1,000 people in the next year. Is the criminal justice system ready for that? Or are we just going to have further backlogs? Is the police service ready for that? in terms of the extended categories. And that's when I spoke about the institutions that must support any amendments or laws that are passed in Trinidad and Tobago. If we are doing this, we need to place equal focus on the institutions that support its success. And that is not happening in Trinidad and Tobago. We talk about them over and over and over again, but then we amend and pass more laws that just ends up adding to the backlog. That we need to take a cool, hard look at. And I also want to add that that $10 million may be seen as, in my opinion, the sum of our collective responsible failures in Trinidad and Tobago. We have failed. We are failing. It also represents to me, because we tend to look at money in Trinidad and Tobago, an abject, in terms of these over 2,000 persons on remand, an abject waste of human potential. How many Eric Williams, Kamil Pasabi Sessas, Keith Rowleys, Farasel Rowleys, Danasha Mahabirs have been wasted or are languishing in those numbers that we did not identify, we did not help through difficult times to realize their full potentials. But we accept it because we sometimes are such a class-driven society that we are happy that it is them, those people, and not our brothers and sisters or our family members. So it's easy for us to dismiss them, or they're just common criminals. But they are on remand. They have not been convicted of any crime, and their lives are wasting away. It is time we look at these issues in a holistic manner if we are to have success in the intention of these laws in Trinidad and Tobago for a better society for all, and that is not happening. I also want to look, as we look to amend this bill, or these aspects of the bill, at the education system in Trinidad and Tobago. Last Thursday, 18,215 students wrote the SEA examination. And we wish them all the best. In 6 or 7 weeks, the results will come down. In our system, in the past, we had something called common entrance. And because of the way common entrance was structured, those who did not make the grade, because it's supposed to be a standardized examination, were either held back. It was also an identification process where they could have been given extra lessons through post-primary, put through vocational studies, and some sort of check and balance existed. Now, we have a situation where of the over 18,000 students who write the SEA, only just over 16,000 actually go into secondary schools, leaving a gap of over 2,000 that we have no idea where they're going or what vulnerable state they're in. And of the just over 16,000 who actually go into secondary schools, just under 25% really did not make the grade to matriculate. And no one is identifying why they were scoring below par, or the fact that because they did not really make the grade and our system just moves you up into a guaranteed spot, that they're going to struggle. They are going to struggle. They're going to have self-esteem problems, and by Form 3 or 4, they have absolutely no sense of self-worth because the system is not helping them. Guess where they're going to end up? And we are doing this every year. Add 2,000 every year. And you're left to wonder if the education system is not, in some instances, a direct conduit to the criminal gangs in Trinidad and Tobago, because we are not helping those students. Every year, and I guess this year will be no different, education minister after education minister will go to the top 3 performing schools in Trinidad and Tobago, part of the theater of our landscape. And there's nothing wrong with commending those who've done well. We are supposed to. They've worked hard, and we must commend them. But what about that under 25% who went up from primary to secondary school, who did not really deserve to move up, not because they don't have the potential, but because they simply did not make the grade and will not be able to cope because they don't have the basic skills in literacy, numeracy, but we push them into secondary schools anyway and expect them to cope and morph into some performing student by magic. We have to deal with these institutions in Trinidad and Tobago if we are not going to allow a direct conduit or many of these laws that we pass to inadvertently target those vulnerable groups. Because in a real sense, those are the young people in Trinidad and Tobago who are going to fall victim to crime and criminality, because they simply cannot cope or are not coping in what is the established system. So all of these categories here, including most notably gangs, are going to suck them up, are going to give them an opportunity to survive through some other means, though illegal. And I want to just reference the gangs issue because, I mean, last week, temporary Senator Ramdeen spoke about the fact that the state was successful in not having any damages awarded to it through the Office of the Attorney General. But you know what? The state not having damages awarded to it does not mean there was no damage done. When 7,000 plus young men, primarily of Afro-Trinbagonian origin, are rounded up, thrown in jail, thrown in vans, thrown in jails, what do you think happens to their psyches when they feel that the state has trampled on their rights? Some, and a couple, two friends of mine actually, who are professionals, were part of that debacle. And they are postgraduate university graduates. And they were part of that. And they gave up on the system. What do you think happens to their minds or their attitude to society or institutions? They rebel. If that could happen to me, I don't care about the state. I don't care about laws. Let me join the gang. Because the gang leader treated me better than the state. And that is why I take great offense in any statement that no damage was awarded. Because damage was done to individuals, to families, to entire communities in this country. And because we're a class society, it's easy for us to distance ourselves from that and not realize that that is also part of the problem that we must fix. This country's credo is every creed and race find an equal place, but that is not happening. The laws must apply to all. And you know, we have a stellar record in Trinidad and Tobago of prosecuting white-collar crime. I think international investors should look upon Trinidad and Tobago as a beautiful investment point. Because we have little or no white-collar crime. With the exception of Ms. Bourgeois, I don't call her first name, whose name keeps coming up over and over. We don't have a white-collar crime problem. It's only according to Gypsy, the little black boys committing crimes. How are they supposed to feel, or how are we supposed to really use these amendments and these bills in the interest of all citizens feeling that the laws are saving us all? And that if you break the law, you are going to be identified and do the time. It's not happening in Trinidad and Tobago. I did say I was going to be short, but there is another aspect of the amendments that, to me, is noteworthy and worthy of mention, and that is the fact that the check and balance in terms of judicial intervention and warrants being issued by a judge of the High Court is something that really needs to be considered in this case, if only to give everyone concerned a sense that there is a check and balance and that the political directorate may not, and I'm not talking about the present administration, may not now, not in the future, abuse the opportunity. And I think that is worthy of consideration. And it's not that I think that this administration will do that, but you don't know who will be sitting opposite there in 5 years or in 10 years, who may have more sinister agendas. And the population needs to be protected against that. I also want to cite, because it would be remiss of me, being a media practitioner, not to articulate, through you, Madam President, several concerns that have been raised to me from members of the media because of the way these amendments are constructed. Take, for instance, an investigative journalist who from time to time will get a call from someone in the underworld because they either want to divulge information of their feeling of abuse from the Trinidad and Tobago police, or they want to comply with an investigative piece giving a different perspective on why they chose a life of crime, or they may be more inclined to talk to a journalist rather than law enforcement to surrender themselves. And that journalist does several pieces. Does that journalist now become someone who is aiding and abetting in a gang-related offense if the person is a gang member? When we have the situation with Andrew Bagu and persons are clamoring for what is one of the foundations of journalism, and that is confidential sources, and someone feels the need, well, you know what, this person writing a million articles or doing investigative journalistic pieces against any particular government, and I want to find out the sources. Does that mean that the executive can call the SSA director or the minister to call the SSA director to provide surveillance on that person's communications devices and intercept and totally thrash their confidentiality issues? These are legitimate concerns of media persons. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it can happen. And these are things we must consider, because without that level of comfort or security, journalists can't practice. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the possibility exists. And these are legitimate concerns of journalists in Trinidad and Tobago with the way it is currently structured, because there is no need for the director to go to a judge of the High Court and say, you know what, we have real concerns about this person and who they're talking to. And in the interest of national security, we need to have them under surveillance. And that is vetted by the judge in the High Court and authorization given, and hopefully for a particular period and not indefinitely. Right now, Apple Incorporated, one of the biggest corporations in the world, is fighting the US government for the very same privacy and confidentiality issues of their clients, billions of people worldwide. So important is that issue of protection of one's data and one's information. Why should we be any different? Why should our benchmark be any different to information that can at any time either serve in the interest of national security or in the destruction of some individual in a more sinister plot? And once again, I cast no aspersions as to the government, but in terms of the possibility, and that is of concern to me and should be addressed, to give some comfort to media workers that they cannot and will not be arbitrarily targeted by someone who feels that they've crossed the line for whatever reason, whether legitimate or not, and in the interest of a free, fair, and balanced press. Interestingly enough, the bill was piloted by the Honorable Attorney General. Last week, Tuesday, was International Press Freedom Day. Isn't that interesting, an interesting coincidence? So these concerns, Honorable Attorney General, I hope you can take into consideration. Finally, one of my suggestions in terms of amendments or possible amendments to the bill is the issue of including some sort of timeline clause whereby if a person is legitimately deemed a person of interest by the state in the interest of national security, that information can only be held for a particular time and not indefinitely. Because if that information or that intelligence is not turned into something that's prosecutable, I don't think that information on that person should just remain in the repository of intelligence indefinitely. So I'm hoping that can be considered in terms of, I don't know if the legal term is a sunset clause for that information, to be, so that it's not a policy, it's part of the law, that information is deleted in the interest of protecting that person's privacy and also security. In closing, I just want to add my piece in terms of my interpretation. I'm not a legal scholar by any means. In terms of the debate of the issue of privacy, and I respectfully disagree with the very learned, very articulate Attorney General in terms of his articulations that we have no expectation to right to privacy. I think if that is the case, and we accept that in Trinidad and Tobago, then anyone could jump over your fence or peep over, as we see in the US, with a camera in your living room, or drive by with a recording device. Go ahead.
Thank you, Honourable Senator, for giving me. Just to clarify, it isn't that we don't have a right to privacy. What I explained was that it's a qualified right, and that the judiciary has recognized that and called for better legislation to deal with privacy. Specifically, Section 4C of the Constitution recognizes the right to private life and family life. And then there are two qualified versions in the common law and in equity, which the courts have been doing their best to preserve a right of privacy about, but that it is in need of legislative attention. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. No problem. But I just wanted to add that I think every citizen, and as I said before, laws are not necessarily for politicians, but for the citizens of the country. And if you go out into the streets of Trinidad and Tobago and you ask anyone, they cherish their right to privacy of their private lives and their family lives. And that must be protected by all of us here in this honorable place and the other space. In closing, I saw a really interesting quotation, and I really want to stress on us, while we look at amending laws and passing laws in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago, that we really take a hard look at the institutions and find some way of coming together to deal with strengthening these institutions. Because without them, these amendments and these laws will amount to nothing, as we've seen in the last 15 to 20 years. So we can pass 5 more years of laws or amend 5 more years of laws without the institutions that support it efficiently. It will amount to nothing. The quote I want to leave with is a very interesting quote, and it focuses on the young people in the country, that says, if a flower doesn't bloom in the environment, don't blame the flower, blame the environment. Madam President, I thank you.
Senator Samuel.
Madam President, I am excited to take part in this debate. I want to first say that I too want to commend the good intentions of the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. But I want to also state that there is an old quote that says, the road to hell is also paved with good intentions. And that good intentions alone must not suffice any amendment to the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, for over 50 years, I was taught by my father and my teachers that the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago guarantees the protection of its citizens. By having enshrined in that Constitution, Madam President, the components of what we call fundamental rights for all of us. Whether we were born after our independence or whether we were born before independence, the Constitution guarantees those who were citizens after independence that they would, and those who were existing here before, that they too would become citizens of the Republic, and that they would be protected by the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam President, I believed in the Constitution as was taught to me as a child, and I believe in it now. But over the past few weeks, I've had cause to question my belief and faith in the Constitution. When I heard flowing out of the fluent lips of the protector of the rights of citizens, the Attorney General, the one who is a defender of the citizenry, flowing smoothly out of his lips, Madam President, that the citizen of this country has no right to privacy. That was his quote. Madam President, that blew my mind. It affected me tremendously. I had to pull the handset from the other place and pull the handset from this place. I had to ensure that this learned gentleman, who is not just eloquent in dress but eloquent in speech, who appears to be an individual who has a good handle of law, stands to tell me and to dash all of my 50 years of understanding to the ground when he says, I have no right. Madam President, that's like saving all your money for 50 years. And then one day you go to the bank and you went to withdraw and the bank says you have no money. What a shocking reality that will become to you. What damaging effects, if we believe what he says, it would have upon all of us. And the citizens are quite concerned. And though the honored AG attempts to kind of smooth his way out through further explanation, it took, to tell you the impact such a statement has had, it took the former Chief Justice, who probably heard the statements of the Honorable Attorney General and understood it exactly as it was meant by him on the day. The Honorable former Chief Justice, and I'm quoting Madam President in the Newsday, Thursday, May 5th, 2016, page 11. The Labastide, there is a right to privacy. So it is not Samuel or John Brown who has a misunderstanding or misrepresented statements of the honored AG. Even a former Chief Justice, one of the CCJ's High Court judges, he and all had to now clarify the issue. And he says, respect to private life looks very much like respect to privacy. And that is hardly distinguishable from the right to privacy, the former Chief Justice said. He also says, but I don't think that even on a strict construction of words of the Constitution that we can come to another conclusion.
Oh my God.
This is the former Chief Justice, honored with experience.
Privy Councillor.
A Privy Councillor. We have to understand that he also heard the remarks. And he had to now bring some ease to somebody of my nature who for 50 years believed and had faith in the Constitution. He had to reassure me after the Honorable AG had dashed my faith in the Constitution to the ground and trampled on my rights. He had to now reassure me that I have rights and the right to privacy. Oh my goodness, if I could run and hug him, I would do that. Because in the state that I was left in after last Tuesday, I needed some kind of reassurance. And the former Chief Justice did that for me, Madam President. Madam President, so the shock was there. And you know what affected me? This abrupt destruction of words that said that I have no rights came very smoothly, without a stutter. And then I wonder if the words of Hitler is relevant today. Because, don't talk about that. And I quote, Madam President, Hitler said, with regards to people's right to freedom, and about freedom, listen to Hitler, and tell me if we are not facing a similar scenario today. Because we have instituted certain trigger mechanisms to interfere with the police commissioners, accept all kinds of mechanisms are being put in place. But here Hitler, the best way to take control over a people and control them utterly is to take a little freedom at a time. To erode rights by 1,000 tiny and almost imperceptible reductions. He says in this way, the people will not see those rights and freedoms being removed until past the point at which these changes cannot be reversed. I want you to understand this. It is not somebody coming with a crane to move your rights. It is a simple, tiny removal, by smooth language and by smooth tongues. And gradually they erode your rights and freedom. Those 16 enshrined rights and freedoms that I was taught as a child. And I asked myself the question, if this is allowed to pass, which other right will go? Which other freedom will go? And I must comment, Madam President, on the presentation of the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, when in trying to bring the point that we have selected memory, that we forgot the issue of the SOE, and I quote that young black men were being arrested. And I had difficulty with the statement. Because, Madam President, if a person in Trinidad and Tobago looks like a person from India, he's called an Indian. If a person in Trinidad and Tobago looks like a person from China, he's called a Chinese. But if he looks like a person from Africa, he's called black.
Yeah, and I have 2 sons.
And I have much difficulty, Madam President, with that.
My son's not from Africa.
I have much difficulty with that because when I look around, I see people of similar color, but they may have a different texture of hair. So I have difficulty, but I am commenting because that was brought up as part of the debate. Madam President, Madam President, if you could silence these individuals, I'd appreciate it, because I was very silent when they were speaking. Madam President, so we need to be very careful that the head of the bar, chose to attempt to justify the fact that we have no rights. But he is so eloquent and always quoting from law history. And one of his favorite quotes always come from Lord Diplock. He always does that. It's his favorite quote. I will quote one of the things from Lord Diplock. In a case, Regina versus the Inland Revenue, the 13th of the 12th, 1979. Where Inland Revenue had some warrant to go on and seize things from people's houses and stuff like that, this particular person. And the case was at court. And Lord Wilberforce said in that matter, well, it was Wilberforce and Diplock who were the quorum, okay? But I just talked, because Diplock is your partner. Diplock and King, Diplock and King, Don't worry yourself, I know you like Diplock, I know you like Diplock, brother. I'm speaking to you, ma'am. I'm speaking to you, ma'am. Good. Lord Wilberforce said, the courts have the duty to supervise, and I would say critically, even jealously, the legality of any purported exercise of these powers, meaning the powers of the warrant. Powers of entry conferred on the revenue. They, as the courts, are the guardians of the citizens' right to privacy. Lord the Black. They're the guardians of it. I'm really elated that the Honorable AG attempted to clarify some points after leaving such quantity of misconceptions in the open space. I'm really elated today. Madam President, and I pray that the Honorable AG still remains open, because I hope so, that he remains open-minded and that he sits to hear and not to respond. Because oftentimes, Madam President, we sit with the attitude just to respond, and we miss hearing what is really intended. And I'm praying that he sits really clear, not just to respond. But Madam President, when we think about this amendment, we need to then clarify what the word amend means. I like to go into words, because words say a lot. And Madam President, according to Webster and according to many dictionaries, to amend means to make minor changes in order to make it fairer or more accurate or to reflect changing circumstances. I want us to understand that. To improve, that's what amend means. To change for the better. To remove the faults from or to correct. That's what the word amend means. So according to the purpose of this bill, is to amend, is to make the thing better. It is to correct the flaws. It is to make sure that the changes that are made make it more accurate. But Madam President, it's so difficult that while there is so much in the atmosphere with regards to the errors and the flaws that exist in this amendment of the Parent Act, Madam President, something has to be wrong because we are actually not making it better. Madam President, many have spoken, both here on the opposition benches and the independent bench, and it is clear in everybody's mind that these amendments are really not making this bill better. They're not. They're not. They're not, Madam President. And I am here begging and asking the Attorney General that he probably needs to now withdraw this bill and then decide, let me revisit it with all that have been suggested and look at it and come again, so that we can have it done right. Because you know something, it is important to know that to deal with the criminal situation in Trinidad and Tobago demands something that demands urgent attention. But urgent attention doesn't mean that we must now just accept anything that comes to the forefront. It's important for us to see that. The intention to expand the remit of the SSA should not be taken lightly, Madam President. It should not be taken for granted. And the reason for that, Madam President, is that the proposed amendments attempts to reconfigure the SSA into what I term a national intelligence agency. And the moment that begins to happen, I began to research intelligence agencies from other regions to see how they operate and what guides them and what governs them. And I found quite a number of things. As a matter of fact, Madam President, issues of abuse was prevalent in the early days of intelligence agencies. Abuse of national powers has occurred, Madam President, in developed nations. Developed nations, Madam President, including Canada and the UK and United States, all of which had stringent oversight mechanisms, much more intrusive than we ever have and will ever have in Trinidad and Tobago. And you know something, Madam President? They went through their problems. So we just cannot accept amendments and accept it and say, well, sounds good. We have got to be very careful because we have the responsibility of protecting the citizens of this country. What is proposed in this amendment, Madam President, is really the concentration of intelligence. It is the amalgamation of all intelligence under one head, under one block, under one agency. Something that I have investigated and found that it is not something that is easily accepted across nations. And that is why what you have across nations is the CIA and the FBI operating differently based on their remit. But what happens, they are able to share intelligence based upon the situation and based upon the demand and the request of whatever agency. So there is a coordinating effort, but the agencies remain separate. And their remit is different because they have to account to different oversight agencies and committees, different oversight intelligence, different oversight mechanisms for each of them because their remit is absolutely different. The FBI, as opposed to the CIA, their remit is different, and there are certain things that the FBI will investigate that the CIA will not investigate. And it is not that the FBI takes all of their data and sends it to some agency, and the CIA sends all of their data to this agency, and then no, it's not like that. They operate independently because they have to answer an account differently. And it's important for us to see that, Madam President. But when I thought about it, about the concentration of intelligence, I remembered Himmler in the days of Nazi Germany, who became the head of the police service, and eventually assisted through one of his second men, those guys that are strong with him, in developing one of the most feared intelligence agencies that Germany ever saw. Madam President, they created something that brought fear to our society. They kept tabs on everyone. Now people talk all kind of nonsense about, sorry, Madam President, I shouldn't say that. But people talk things that doesn't make sense. With regards to Cocoa and Son and all kinds of things that don't make sense. But Madam President, we take for granted what people shed their blood for. Their rights. We take for granted what nations fight for, their rights. Blood was shed for the rights of people in the world. And we take that for granted, and people talk about Cocoa and Son. No. You don't have to have Cocoa and Son to stand up for your rights in Trinidad and Tobago. You don't have to have it. And it doesn't make sense. And if it comes out of mouths, it really says out of the abundance of the heart. The mouth speaks. Madam President, shortly after the intelligence agency was formed in the 1930s in Germany, Gestapo law was enforced. It incrementally, it started off not looking so bad. And then gradually it ended up, Madam President, as Gestapo law. And then all of a sudden, and I'm hearing that, this SSA and all of the things, there are a lot of questions, Madam President, as to who is accountable to who. A lot of questions. I found some strange things out today. Who is accountable to who? And not only that, based on the Communication of Interception Bill, the authorized officers, the director of the SIA, the police commissioner, and the chief of defense staff have to make judicial judgment, and they're not qualified to do that. And that's why it's necessary for us, because the court has the right to protect me. and that going to a judge who has judicial experience, I feel satisfied that he has my rights in his mind. But when I go to, when there is somebody who can make decisions about interception and who can make decisions without that, and they can make a decision and determine things, and they have no judicial experience whatsoever, it brings a scary feeling that these people will do what they want. Madam President, and it means that democracies can be threatened because these agencies will have no serious checks and balances, because ever so often a Joint Select Committee may bring them before them and question them. Ever so often they will write a report and the Auditor General will review it. But what is happening now? What is happening on an ongoing basis? Who do they report to? What are the agencies and the systems in place that will now keep checks and balances and oversight over these committees? And Madam President, if I may quote based on this, based upon what is purported in this amendment, what's purported in the whole scenario, because they are interlocking things with this bill and the interception of communication. Madam President, hear what crept in after having that concentrated intelligence happening in that nation. It says, neither the instructions nor the affairs of the Gestapo will be open to review by the administrative courts. It got well bad. I'm not too sure if that was the initial intention. I'm not too sure if when they formed the intelligence agency, that was the main objective. But it grew into that where no court could come against the Gestapo. So they were above the law. And that is why we are asking for checks and balances, Madam President. Because the fear that embraced the citizens of Germany then is the same fear that could embrace the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have experiences, Madam President. We have experiences, Madam President. Experiences in this country where intelligence information has been abused. As a matter of fact, it was Senator Roach who reiterated in his contribution on the budget, where he felt very, very, very taken aback and affected by the amount of his friends that were saying to him that their phones are being tapped. And he said it in his presentation. And he said that it is wrong. The rights of people has to be protected. And I remember him clearly when he said that. Madam President, so it's important for us to understand maybe what is coming next when all of this has gained ground in our country is that people will not be able to speak against governments again. Because maybe, Madam President, the issue of sedition may step in. Because I remember, Madam President, in 1970, when university students, Ayagoya Ome and Makanda Dagger and Mbamo Hini and all of these young university students took to the streets, Madam President, all of a sudden, the Sedition Act was reviewed. Because that was a way of silencing the voices of the oppressed. That was a way, Madam President, of bringing them down. That was a way, Madam President, of dealing with those people who were willing to sacrifice themselves to defend the rights and the freedoms and to stand up against the oppression of governments that day. Madam President, it may not happen now, you know. And I say to the Attorney General, the Honorable Attorney General, and this is not against him as a person. Madam President, this has nothing to do with him as a person. He's a gentleman. But Madam President, it may not happen now. But whatever we do now with regards to this legislation may clearly give powers to some tyrant down the road who is determined to ensure that if he comes to power in this country, he never leaves power. We may just be doing that by this legislation. And we have got to be very, very careful. Because then it would reach the point that you don't know who to trust. Senator Cummings said, people calling him and saying, boy, you sure I could talk on this phone, boy? I could talk on this phone. You know, you feel so I could talk about, you sure they're safe? Well, regardless of what he may have said, that is the feeling of the citizens. And it is necessary to ensure that the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago do not feel that way. And the Honorable Attorney General has not been able to really clear the minds of citizens that it is not so, Madam President. And if that is the case, there is a possibility that if you speak then against governments, I mean, there's a risk. Because they may just be hearing you. There is a possibility because it happened in other countries that you don't know who to trust. It might be the milkman. It might be the maid. It might just be your own children who are so influenced by the powers of the day that they will report you and says, Daddy and Mommy was speaking against the government. That is a possibility. It happened before. And it could happen again. Not only that, Madam President, when I looked at the interception of communication bill, I realized that the act was binding on the state. It was binding the state. This one is not. I said to myself, wow, this is a strange one. Was that willfully left out? Or was it a lapse of the intellectual minds? Because the Interception Act was binding. It bound the state. This one is not binding the state. What does that say to us? Where is the recourse? What is happening? You know, where is the recourse? And those are the questions that we must answer in this debate, Madam President. There is no aspect of the bill, of this bill. But Madam President, the director of the SSA doesn't have to be qualified. He is cool to be anybody. He doesn't have to have no judicial experience, no interception experience. He doesn't have to have anything. He doesn't have to have anything. And you know, it sounds so nonsensical that people keep talking about Rich Miranda, right? Senator Paul was 100% correct. That mustn't happen again. That's why we are speaking. It must not happen again. It must not happen again. And this is no joke. I'm saying, it's a different breed, it's a different mind, you know. It's a different mind, and it's important for us to see that, Madam President. Madam President, if we are not careful, and we concentrate intelligence, we can find ourselves in difficulty. Madam President, there was a time in history in the 1988, somewhere around there, when, if I have it right, there was what is called the Watergate scandal. And Madam President, the Watergate scandal, the learning from it should not be taken lightly. Because people at the highest level of the CIA were part of the process of the Watergate scandal. And they were in cahoots with the then President Nixon. And thank God for effective journalism, who should never be muzzled. Thank God for effective journalism. The Watergate scandal was exposed. And we had the resignation of a president. But the people at the highest level in the intelligence agency was part and parcel of the mess of the Watergate scandal. And then it had the Contragate scandal. It is important for us to understand that. It is to understand that. And the mutterings on the other side doesn't make sense. We're talking serious stuff here. Madam President, it is important for us to understand that if we do not take stock and put the checks and balances, serious checks and balances, and ensure that the director and all of these people who are now are people with authority, that they cannot judge or give judgment as a learned judge can do. But yet they have the authority to do that. And it's important that the AG look seriously at that across the board, not just for the director of the SSA, but with the authority given to the Commissioner of Police in this situation of interception, as well as the Chief of Defense Staff. Because they have no judicial. A judge could determine based upon their request and what they presented. No. This is not correct. This is not judicially right. They cannot. They will deal with it based upon how they feel at the time. And you know how feelings are. Today we feel one way based upon situations, and the next day we don't. So, Madam President, it is something that I'm encouraging the Honorable Attorney General to really look at, lest we get ourselves in tremendous trouble. Because it was these intelligence agencies, the CIA, Madam President, that were criticized for involvements in a lot of stuff. You remember the Bay of Pigs situation in Cuba? The CIA, quite a number of those things, the CIA was involved. The Iran situation where they removed the legitimate leader and they now replaced him with somebody else. All of those things we have to look at. The CIA was involved in that. So if there are no checks and balances, and immediately subsequent to all of those periods, the American system began to put serious checks and balances and oversight committees, and they had to report on a continuous basis as to the affairs and what is taking place on a regular basis, not by an annual report. Not by an annual report, Madam President. Madam President, so many nations of the world have kept it kind of apart because in the case of the CIA reports both to the executive and the legislative branch. And let me tell you how it goes. On the executive branch, Madam President, the CIA must answer to three groups: the National Security Council, the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, and the Intelligence Oversight Board. Three groups. Madam President, the National Security Council in the US is made up of the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense. Not only that, and that's according to their website. Not only that, Madam President, but the National Security Council advises the President on domestic, foreign, and military issues that relate to the national security and provides guidance, review, and directions to how the CIA gathers intelligence.
That's part of the executive.
Madam President, on the legislative side, the CIA works primarily with the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee
Senator
on
Samuel,
Intelligence.
you have 5 more minutes.
Sure, ma'am. These two committees, along with the Foreign Relations, Foreign Affairs, and Armed Services Committees, authorize the CIA's program and oversee the CIA. So there are checks and balances at various levels, Madam President. It is not the Auditor General. It is not just the National Security Council. But there are far more reaching checks and balances, Madam President, in regards to the CIA. To the FBI, Madam President, is of a different nature. And they are limited in their capacity as to what they can do. Madam President, and it's only a federal judge who can approve any monitoring or any situation of that nature. Madam President, the police service today has all kinds of departments. A lot of departments. Anti-kidnapping squad, community police, court and process branch, crime and problem analysis branch. And here they remit. It says the CAPA is the cornerstone in the transition to intelligence, the police service. Intelligence-led policing, currently in the process within the TTPS, established in 2007. The branch also is the data processing unit that analyzes information from crime reports and other sources to better the crime deterrent, disruption, and detection efforts in the police service. So even within the police service, there is a department that seems to be operating similar to some of the remit of the SSA. So it may be necessary to take the entire SSA and make it a department of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and strengthen their internal intelligence mechanism so that they can become a far better agency, a far better police service in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, this must not be taken lightly. We must not just sit by and allow this amendment to pass by and say, well, it's better you do anything, if you do nothing, it's a problem. That's not the issue. The problem is about doing what is right. The problem is correcting the errors. The problem is, as we amend, is to make it better. The problem is to ensure that those flaws in the amendment that maybe need to be amended, and it may be you need to just pull everything back and decide, let's revisit it again. Madam President, I urge this House, do not take the decisions we make today lightly, but ensure that this bill is not approved in its present state and condition. It must be returned and come again, or else serious amendments, serious adjustments has to be made to it. And the only way that can be done is to take it away, bring it again, and adjust it again. I thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, it's an honor for me to join this debate on what I obviously consider to be, although purported to be just a couple of amendments, but it's serious legislation with some far-reaching consequences. The SSA Amendment Bill seeks to increase the scope of the operations of the SSA. Initially established in 1995 to deal with drug trafficking only. What these amendments purport to do is to expand the definition of serious crime, to provide for some form of information sharing, as was properly articulated here in this House. There's the silo effect of intelligence, and we want to break down those silos. It also caters for compliance with regards to treaty obligations and international agencies for providing single point contact with the Trinidad and Tobago intelligence system. And finally, it caters administratively for the consolidation of other functions that were performed in the past, in particular, the National Operations Center, which was established by a cabinet note, incidentally, and the National Training Academy, which trains the entire ambit of the protective services and intelligence services in Trinidad. But Madam Speaker, before I deal with the bill specifically, I just want to make a couple comments on the Attorney General's attempt to contact the independent senators for clarification and the opposition senators. Madam President, we operate a bicameral system here in Trinidad. And the system is as such that in the House of Representatives, you have the government and the opposition. Both the government and the opposition is under the whip. So invariably, no matter how good you debate or what points you make in the lower house, if it is a simple majority and you're operating under the whip, the legislation will pass. Yep. The government is for, the opposition against. It will pass once it's a simple majority, and if it's a special majority, if you have a special majority in the House, the bills will pass, invariably. This brings us to the Senate. The drafters of the Republican Constitution, in particular, Sir Ellis Clark, thought through this process with a great level of clarity. There are 16 government senators, one of which goes on to become the president of the Senate. So it leaves 15 of us. There are 6 opposition senators and 9 independent senators. 9 and 6 is 15. 15 matching 15. It has to have a decider. Initially, in some years, a decade or so ago, I used to question why it is a Senate should have more independence than an opposition, because it doesn't reflect the democracy of the country. You could have expanded the opposition bench and put 4 senators to adjudicate. But in the wisdom of Sir Ellis Clark and his drafters, they placed 9 independent senators with 6 to make 50. So why are we debating in the Senate? The House is a given. And we may well say, oh, we're talking to the population. But the population is not voting on a bill to pass a bill. You know. We, at the government side, is debating primarily to the independent bench to ask you, to convince you that what we're bringing forward is good legislation. So generally speaking, we will come and raise issues on the floor. But when matters become complicated and based on certain responses you get, it is imperative and it is our prerogative to seek the independent bench to bring further clarity to the legislation before you. It is as simple as that. It has nothing to do with lobbying or trying. You are independent. You are independent in your own right. 9 of you are 9 independent republics under a coordinator. He's not a whip. And that is the context in which this Senate operates. So the government is well within its right to articulate to you what the issues are. And if you need clarification, the Attorney General brought the Director of the SSA to answer your questions. So I just want to put that on the record, Madam Speaker. Madam President, this amendment deals specifically with expansion of the definition of serious crime. It removes the word drug trafficking and replaces it with serious crime, and it states from the bill itself, serious crime includes offenses related to homicide, treason, terrorist act, terrorist financing, hijacking, kidnapping, trafficking in persons, etc., etc. This was read out many times here. Senator Mark and the opposition circulated some amendments. Under Schedule 1, it goes as follows. Replace serious crime, don't put serious crime, put Schedule 1. And here what Schedule 1 includes. Homicide, exactly as in the amendments. Treason, offenses under the Anti-Terrorism Act, identical. Hijacking, identical. Kidnapping, identical. Offenses under the Trafficking in Persons Act, identical. Offenses under the Anti-Gang Act, identical. Offenses under the Dangerous Drugs Act, identical. Corruption, money laundering. Offenses under the Firearms Act, chemical, biological, nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction, cybercrime. And they included a new one here, offenses under the Extradition Act.
With corruption and money laundering.
So, Madam President, there's 80 or 90% similarity in what they call the schedules and what we are planning to expand on it with. So then the bill is supposed to be approved without much effort. The problem is, or the issue is, you know, in Jamaica, Madam President, I studied in Jamaica in the late 70s, early 80s, when Michael Manley was in power and there were some hardships in the grocery in terms of getting basic items. And when items were scarce, for example, corned beef was scarce, they have something called the marrying the goods. So to get 2 tin of corned beef, you have to buy 4 packs of soap. We have to buy 2 bottles of oil because they marry the goods. What the opposition is attempting to do is to marry the goods. Because there's concurrence on the expanded definition of serious crime, but I'm not approving that until you change how you appoint the director, the SSA director, your former a deputy director, you form an intelligence review committee, and you do all sorts of things. It's omnibus legislation they want. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, members of the Senate, through you, Madam Speaker, we are going in a progressive sequence, Madam President. It's a progressive sequence, and I will show you the progression. Because you cannot bring perfect legislation and always omnibus legislation. You can always find some flaw in the Interception of Communication Bill Act, and you can find some further amendments that you may want to purport in the SSA Act. But, Madam President, I will deal with that. The issues raised on the proposed amendments shortly. But, Madam President, you know, I like to what I like to call rewind the tape and, put this whole issue in context. But before I do that, I just want to do some rebuttals on some of the comments made by other speakers. Senator Shrikissoon is one of my favorite senators. She's so gentle. But she and Senator Danisa Mahabe
Not gentle.
articulated a point which I think is flawed in logic. They claimed that under the old law, where the SSA was only responsible for drug trafficking, the performance was not up to scratch, so to speak. And use that as the basis not to support, or not to claim to support the expanded remit of the SSA. Now, that is a fundamental flaw in terms of logic and in terms of common sense. Because, let me go back to the local government reform process. We've concluded 14 consultations, and we are expanding the role of local government, giving them social service delivery responsibilities, repairs of schools, a whole new suite of responsibilities. And do you know, with the devolution of power and authority. And some of the comments that came from the floor was that they're doing what they're doing good now, why give them expanded responsibility? You have to fix the organization. But the remit for the responsibility is still there. The remit is still there to have that added responsibility for the thing. So today is a technological world. You know, it's like telling the CIA or the MI5 or MI6 in the UK that you are only responsible for drug traffic intelligence. You cannot survive in a modern world like that. There are no acts of terrorism. There are no terrorist financing, human trafficking. Look how many people, it's not even making the papers again, you know, how many missing persons there are in Trinidad and Tobago. And it spares no one, man, woman, child, young and old. It has absolutely no respect of person. And to speak about Senator Shrikissoon's contribution, it is the same Senator Shrikissoon, I won't be harsh on you there, who brought to this House in a private motion cybercrime and asked the legislator here to do something to close the legislative gap on issues of cybercrime. Cybercrime is now in the expanded list of remit of the SSA. And we as a government supported that private motion. Okay? So we are on the right track. Okay? However, I just wanted to make that point. I just want to, before I delve into the bill itself, to rebut my good friend Senator Rodger Samuel, former Member of Parliament for Arima. Former is the key word here. Hitler, talking about the SSA, Gestapo, for heaven's sake, that is fear-mongering.
Exactly.
We're nowhere near that. I mean, that is the work of a fertile imagination. Okay? Okay? So I want to warn senators, in particular the opposition, to stay away from that type of language. Just as when Senator Gerard Ramley spoke about ethnic cleanses, these are terminologies that have international significance.
That's right.
Ethnic cleansing took place in Bosnia.
You bring it to Trinidad.
And Gestapo is something that Europe has tried to outlive and throw that as a distant memory behind them. Look today, Germany, the people who spoke about the great Aryan race, Germany is the only country in Europe that has accepted 1 million refugees out of Syria. Check the transformation of societies that has learned from their history. So, Senator Samuel, I want to guide you as your friend. Stay away from that type of language. And finally, Madam President, you know, I am chairman of the People's National Movement, but in these debates, I say very few items of raw politics. But permit me for once. Senator Samuel said, wish me Ramnarine should never happen again. And he's right. But I want this nation to know that for wish me Ramnarine to never happen again, the UNC must never get into power. Madam President, let me just put this legislation into perspective now. You see, I always use the phrase, let's rewind the tape. And Madam President, I want to draw your attention to September 17th, 1998. I challenge any one of you in this house to tell me what happened on September 17, 1998. Something very significant in this country that probably has us where we are today. On September 17, 1998, one Deuchan Ramdani escaped police custody at the Princestown Magistrates Court. He was whisked away to Iquitos and sent on a boat to Venezuela. Deuchan Ramdani escaped police custody. And in a very prophetic way, the then opposition leader, Patrick Augustus Moving Manning, took great offense to that. He probably was seeing things that few in this country were seeing at the time. Patrick Manning abhorred that act. And he said, something is fundamentally wrong with the police service. That was his phrase. And he went to the then Prime Minister, Basdev Pandey, and said to him, as a government and an opposition, we have to work together to deal with crime. In 1998, Madam President, the murder rate was only 98. In 1999 it was 93. It is from 2000 it started its upward climb. And Mr. Manning went to Pandey and he said, I am willing to work with you on solving the issues of crime as it relates to legislation in particular. Well, everybody knows when 2001 the government changed. By that time, they weren't just involved in their speaking. But Madam President, I want to put on record here that two great prime ministers, Patrick Augustus Moving Manning and Basdev Pandey, worked together. When Mr. Manning was Prime Minister from 2001 to 2007 in particular, he worked with Mr. Pandey. They brought what they call the police bills to the Parliament. Patrick Manning bent backwards to make this legislation go forward. He is the first Prime Minister that gave up his veto power as a Prime Minister to facilitate the opposition at the time. It is under the virtual instructions of the UNC at the time, the opposition, that this whole appointment of this tortuous and labyrinthical path to appoint a police commissioner. And then the police commissioner had to even be approved by Parliament. But the key point here is that the Prime Minister, Patrick Manning, gave up his veto power. The Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa vetoed the director of the FIU twice when it came on her desk until the present one was installed. So here it is, a PNM administration. And I peg this point from the Ramdani matter up until today, continues to support legislation in terms of crime as it impacts positively on the society. Senator Cummings outlined the series of bills that were supported by Dr. Rowley's as leader of the opposition at the time, and he went through about 5, look, I have it's something like 20 bills: anti-gang legislation, anti-terrorism amendment bill, bail amendment bill, interception of communication, miscellaneous provision, kidnapping and bail, trafficking in persons bill, the administration of justice, DNA bill, administration of justice in indictable proceedings bill, anti-doping in sports bill. You have it, it's all here. I just want to make the point that if it's one thing I know the PNM stands for, is its commitment to dealing with this crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. Our track record supports that. As an administration, in terms in government and in opposition, all we can do is make the legislation. It is the implementation arm of these issues where the challenges lie. Whether it's the SIA, the police service, and the intelligence agency. So we are handcuffed to a point because you under the current system, you cannot instruct the police commissioner how to do his investigations. And when they spoke about the Mona's drug bust, and I think it's Senator Shrikissoon was talking about it, the SIA cannot instruct the police, as the AG said, who to search and what to do. So the concept of going through the sequence of all the legislation that was passed and that has been supported by this administration is unquestionable. And our commitment to law enforcement and criminality and dealing with crime and justice in Trinidad and Tobago is unblemished. Madam President, let me now deal with some specific issues that was raised in the debate. A lot of speakers dealt with it in terms of the Interception of Communication Act and who are the, what you call, authorized persons. It is clear that Section 6 of this act, this bill, says that notwithstanding any other law, a person does not commit an offense under this section if the communication is intercepted in obedience to a warrant issued by a judge under Section 8 or 11, and then the communication is intercepted by an authorized officer. An authorized officer has been defined as the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of Defense Staff, and the Director of the SSE. The communication is intercepted on the following grounds: in the interest of national security. Or you might say that is a vague phrase, but that is how legislation is drafted. Because you cannot specifically, according to a schedule, define what national security is. But you have people implementing the law. And as a nation, we have to start to trust some of the officers we put into these positions, because you cannot say the person who have the flexibility in determining what is in the interest of national security must now be guided by 6 pages of specifically what national security means. For the prevention or detection of an offense, which for a penalty of more than 10 years, for the purpose of safeguarding the economic well-being of the state. You know, I was doing some research, and that was taken verbatim from British legislation, where the MI5 legislation, Security Services Act 1989, which states that there shall be a security services agencies, whatever. And then they said the function of the service will be for the protection of national security, in particular, the protection against threats from espionage, terrorism, and sabotage, etc. And then in 3, it says, it shall also be the function of the service to safeguard the economic well-being of the United Kingdom. Exact wording. And what does that mean? Because you have to protect your trade. So when Senator Shrikissoon was saying who you hand over information to, while it specifically said the police, the defense force, and law enforcement agency, it gives you the catch-all that for other arms of government. Because if somebody is threatening your economic well-being, the Minister of Trade is supposed to know. And this is how legislation is drafted. You cannot draft into a legislation every specific thing. So, with regards, I know a lot has been said now about whether the director of the SSA has the same qualification as it relates to the COP and the Chief of Defense Staff. I'll deal with that shortly. Madam President, oversight. it was articulated by the Attorney General and in the lower house to some extent that oversight would be provided. A lot has been made out of the Auditor General. We are aware of that. The Auditor General is a financial audit. And one of the limits of the Auditor General is a post facto audit. In fact, we are now talking about having an accounting office out of the Parliament to have more online audit function in terms of the budget delivery. So while I agree that the Auditor General is post facto, but having said that, it is still an audit function. Operationally, it has parliamentary oversight, and I will deal with parliamentary oversight when I deal with the appointment of the director. But parliamentary oversight can be provided by two joint select committees. One, the Joint Select Committee on Statutory Authorities, and secondly, the Joint Select Committee on National Security. The issue here, Madam President, is that we are constrained by a small parliament. Joint select is really where you have a large backbench. It works beautifully in the United Kingdom, where there's 300 and something members of parliament and the cabinet is 30 something. So you have over 300 or 280 something, 290 something backbenchers to use in your committee. The new standing orders provided for a series of new joint select committees. All the government did is decided that we wanted to chair 4 committees. One happened to be national security. But I make the point, when you sit on a joint select committee, you do not sit in your capacity as a minister. You sit in your capacity as a legislator on the parliament, and you provide oversight. I mean, I don't want to talk up my own self, but Senator Chris, he chairs the Joint Select Committee on Land and Infrastructure, and ask him at the last meeting who was the most aggressive person going after the Ministry of Agriculture lands. My own colleague, Senator Clarence Ambarat, was scared like hell when his PSs spoke to him, because I had put the question to them in a brutal form, because there are issues facing the Ministry of Agriculture that has to be dealt with. Minister Imbud chairs the Energy Committee. The two most aggressive questioning came from Minister Imbud himself and myself, who is vice chairman of the committee. So it is not to say because you are a minister, you will protect the government. What will happen is that you cannot be a line minister with responsibility for that line function and chair a committee, or even sit on a committee like that. But within the constraints of our situation, there is nothing so fundamentally wrong with ministers sitting on Joint Select Committee, because the track record will show that we question in a way that is similar, or in some cases superior, if I say so guardedly, than the opposition. Okay?
You can't be serious. I don't even respond.
So, Madam Chairman, Madam President, let me just deal with now the appointment of the SSA. The SSA director.
Could we hear the minister in silence, please? Continue, Minister.
The appointment of the SSA director. Some amendment was circulated to say that you have to go down and appoint deputy directors and what have you.
Honourable Minister, may I just intervene here? Any amendments that have been circulated will only be adopted in committee stage. Okay. So let us just talk without dealing with specifically with the amendments.
I am guided. But the appointment, a statutory authority is an institution created by statute. I mean, that's a given. If you look at some of the examples that we already have on our legislative thing, the Water and Sewage Authorities Act. All the Water and Sewage Authorities Act is states that the organization will be run by a executive director. It doesn't drill down into the organization, because that is an administrative function. The Civil Aviation Authorities Act speaks about a director general, but it doesn't go down to say whether I should have 2 or 3 assistant directors and how many engineers and flight monitoring people and air traffic controllers you should have. And the same way WASA won't tell you how many engineers to employ in the agency. So the act just gives you who runs the organization, like the director, and then the administration will put in the organization deeper down as we speak. But Madam President, I now want to deal with what I consider the most controversial part of my presentation. So I will take a deep breath before I say what I have to say. There is this growing feeling in Trinidad and Tobago, and it is getting some traction, that the only time a position is independent, it is when it is appointed by the president. Now, bearing in mind, again, historically, how we ended up with this form of government. We had a governor general who represented the monarchy. The 1976 Constitution changed the governor general's name to the president, but basically maintained the same format of government. But as we speak, Queen Elizabeth II of England cannot appoint anybody, you know. It's the executive, the prime minister, and the cabinet that does all the appointments. And the oversight is provided by the parliament. But here we have a situation that I see is creeping into the legislative arm of the state and the parliament, that everything you have to know, hide behind now. Independence means it must be appointed by the president or at his own discretion in consultation with the prime minister and the leader of the opposition. We cannot continue that way. We are in a more evolving democracy. And democracy is about going to the people in an election and asking them for your franchise, asking them for their franchise. You are saying, I prepare a manifesto for you. I offer you good governance. I am asking you to vote for me to become the executive to run the affairs of the nation. And when people give you that mandate, it is a serious responsibility. And there has to be the exercise of executive authority in some form or fashion in governance. Otherwise, governance will not work, because we'll go back to a monarchy. So there's a feeling now that everything that the prime minister appoints or a minister appoints, something is flawed with that. It is not flawed. It is democracy. And democracy, as practiced by modern democracies, is the executive has the authority, and the oversight is provided by the parliament. Look, Senator Samuel spoke about the CIA. Executive National Advisory Council is who? The executive, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, what have you. And then where does the other three agencies, one is senatorial and one is congressional. So isn't that parliamentary? That is what we have here already existing too. And then an executive oversight, which is fundamentally the National Security Council. And it also includes on the National Security Council people who are not part of the executive, vis-a-vis the Chief of Defense Staff and the Commissioner of Police. So, Madam President, I wanted to put this whole issue of presidential appointment into context. And in closing, I probably have how many more minutes? 9 more minutes, yeah. And I will crave your indulgence to take me through the thing there to conclude before we go for the tea break. Yeah. The other areas of responsibilities of the SSC. You see, 90% of this debate was focused on the interception of communication aspect of the SSC. But the SSA does much more than that. The SSA is an intelligence agency where interception of communication is only one aspect of it. There are databases now that the SSA could study. Now there's something called databases, there's something called search engines, there's something called data mining. You can drill down into the data set, and with sophisticated software, you could pick up trends that no human brain, you could have an IQ of what, could never pick up. Good, there's no strategic software in terms of analyzing financial data to pick up trends that could lead to money laundering and to illicit acts or financial impropriety. There's so much, because you live in a data-driven world. We speak about, we want to take decisions based on data. The whole world is structured to capture data. Data is no longer expensive to capture. The first IBM mainframe computer was in a room big like this. That data in the room big like this in the first IBM mainframe is now on a chip that is the size of my fingernail. And that is the power of data now. So we have to capitalize on that power, colleagues, and through you, Madam President. And these agencies not only provide surveillance, they provide analytical support for the major agencies of the state. If the criminals are using technology, we have to start using technology. You cannot possibly get a conviction now without using modern technology in the context. Because witnesses are not going to expose themselves to risk and witness protection and what have you. So these are some of the issues that, while we skew the debate only on the surveillance and in terms of interception of communication component of it, the ambit of the SSA is significantly larger. Again, I want to debunk another point. You go to a judge for a warrant, that's fine. There are 3 people who are authorized to intercept communication: the Commissioner of Police, Chief of Defense Staff, and the Director of the SSA. But the process must be initiated. And in more cases than none, more cases, 9 out of 10 times, or probably 19 out of 20 times, or 99 out of 100 times.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Madam President. It is an officer investigating a crime that beats a roadblock that says he wants some surveillance in this matter. And he fills the 10-page form and sends it to the Director of SSA, or for that matter, the Commissioner of Police, but more likely the SSA Director, because that is where the intelligence infrastructure lies. The Director of SSA doesn't opt one day and say, I plan to put surveillance on Senator Daneshwar Mahave. And obviously no minister, and we asked the Director that today in his presentation, no minister could come to him and say, I want you to have a surveillance on this specific number. It has to be justified. And in more cases than none, it is justified through the police agencies, because they are doing the investigation on criminals. So this whole issue that this is a big spy network is ill-founded. It is ill-founded because we feed out of these rumor mongering that is going on, in particular from the front bench there. So I just want to put to rest that concept that a minister or some friend of a friend could go to the SSA Director and say, monitor this person, monitor this number. And finally, Madam President, it deals with the consolidation of certain agencies like the NOC, the National Operations Center, which is an operational component created by executive fiat, by a cabinet note. $1 billion was spent in procuring equipment from the Chinese on that, but with no parliamentary oversight of the sort. And finally, our treaty obligations. We live in a modern world. Trans-border issues are the most prominent issues as we speak. Check the Panama Papers, trans-border. We have to have a single point accountability in terms of intelligence to deal with our treaty obligations and to deal with international agencies that needs to contact us to share information, and we have to share it with an authorized agency, and we want to deem the SSA, the Security Services Agency, to be that agency. So, Madam President, in winding up, I think I have outlined with some level of clarity the issues that really face us. The amendment is basically to expand the definition of serious crime. I will be the first to admit that there are other aspects of the SSA legislation that probably need amending. There's aspects of the interception of communications that possibly needs amending, but we cannot wait to get it 100% right and bring omnibus legislation. This is a step in the right direction, and I crave the indulgence of the opposition bench, but in particular the independent bench, to support this piece of legislation. Thank you very much.
Honorable Senators, at this time we will take the tea break. So we will suspend this set. We will now suspend until 5 minutes past 5 for the tea break. So we're suspended until 5 past 5.
As indicated by the President of the Senate, the 18th sitting of the Senate in the first session of the 11th Parliament that takes place on Tuesday, May 10th, 2016, is suspended. Stay with us on Parliament Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament channel. During the break, we go to our regularly scheduled programming and we return to our coverage of today's sitting at 5:05 p.m.